Thanks for that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. Take up your cross and follow me are the words of Jesus. And in our intro to the presentation tonight, we've read one of the speeches by Jesus with these words in it. We're going to focus on two of the speeches of Jesus that use this quote from our title. And looking into these will hopefully better understand the picture of what the quote means and help us understand what our title is for tonight. Just as a little bit of a context around the reading we've had, first we believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God, and the Bible's broken up into two parts, the New and the Old Testament. Tonight we're going to look at the New Testament, and it's been broken up into various books, and the first four books are the account of the life of Jesus Christ. And they're from four slightly different angles. So sometimes the same things are mentioned in each book, and sometimes there's slightly different focuses on the books. There's some slightly different things that are mentioned. Tonight, though, we're going to stay in the record of Mark with both of our speeches that we're going to look at. So as you know, the first one that we will look at tonight is in Mark 8 and verse 34, which we had read for us. And when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. Just got a slightly different translation for that on the screen here for us, which I think will help us understand the quote, which says, Then calling to him the crowd and also his disciples, he said to them, If anyone be desirous of following me, let him ignore self and take up his cross, and so be my follower. So to look at the subject tonight, we really need to look at the whole speech, not just one part of it. And we'll break this verse down into four parts, which I think will help us with the overall big picture in the question tonight. So we're going to break it down into these four sections, which I've said. So the first is, if anyone is desirous to follow me, let him ignore or deny self, take up his cross, and then follow me. So this is the formula that we are going to explain tonight. So part one, if anyone is desirous to follow me. I think in looking at this first section, let's first cover who this was aimed at, who this speech Jesus was speaking to at the time. And we see in our reading tonight that in verse 27, he starts off speaking to just his disciples. And we won't talk about that section tonight, but we see that it was we just want to reference he was speaking to his disciples in verse 27. And then we continue down into verse 31, where both the Mark and the Luke record reference that it's now more than just the disciples. It says, and he began to teach them, in verse 34, and when he called the people unto him with his disciples. So he references everyone that was there. It wasn't now just his disciples, it was all the followers that were there. They all wanted to come. He wanted them all to hear what he had to say about this. Jesus knew that he wasn't going to be on earth forever at this stage, and he had a good following at that time, but they were happy just to follow. And what were they going to do when he had passed away? He wanted them to take that next step. He was looking for them to take the next step. They were happy to follow him when listen to him preach and stand up to the authorities. They were happy for them. They were happy to follow him when he was doing miracles. But the call was now to go out and to do the next step. The invitation is open to everyone who wanted to listen. It's not just for a specific people. So were they just willing to follow when he was there? What were they going to do once he had stopped preaching and stopped teaching and healing? It was easy to get caught up in the moment and to see the amazing signs and be drawn in by the teaching of him when he was there, but was they actually affect their heart and cause them to change? So the first part of this is about anyone who wants to follow. So do we actually want to follow Christ? He's addressing everyone. This isn't something that is exclusive. It's not a select few or for people that look a certain way or do a certain thing. This shows that it's also a choice for anyone. It's not a demand, it's free will. If you want to be a follower, it's your choice. So what are we doing in our lives, and what are our plans? We're not forced to be followers. It's a voluntary thing that we enter into, but we know that with every action that we have, there's a consequence. So there's nothing forced upon us, and we need to have the desire, being excited to follow. And this brings us to this first part of if anyone has desire to follow. Desire to follow. What does the word mean? Well, multiple dictionaries say that the word desire is aching for something, craving, desperate. You want it very much. So clearly, it's a strong feeling towards something. You could say that it would consume you, consume your life to get it done. I guess a current way of looking at it at the moment with the Olympics on, you hear all the backstories of the various athletes and the sacrifices that they had to take, and how their desire to compete and their desire to win, that the desperateness they are, how desperate they are to win, and how it consumes their life. Well, we could easily say that that type of desire is what Christ is mentioning here. He wants, you want to do anything for him. You want to sacrifice anything to follow after Jesus. So where is our passion at, and where are our desires and our commitments at? So first of all, are we willing to follow, and are we desirous to follow Jesus? So once we understand that we do want to follow and we're desirous to follow, then the next step leads into what are we going to be desirous to follow, which is in part 2, which is about ignoring and denying self. This section starts to show where the desires need to be channeled into. So ignoring self, denying self, separation, disown, and reject are some of the words that come up when you look in the Greek meaning of the word. So why are we denying self? What's the problem? Well, there's two ways of life. There's the way of sin, and there's the way of God. The way of sin is selfishness. It's the way of doing what you want. It can be summarised by the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. This way may be fun and easy for now, but when you die, you're dead. There's nothing further. But the way of God opens up to the plan of God with the earth, and with the plan for his kingdom to be on earth, which is a subject for another night. It says if we want to follow Jesus, we need to make some changes in our lives. It says that we can't do both. We can't deny self. We can't do the pleasures of this world and follow Jesus. We see this further explained in the Mark record, where in verse 34 it says, whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. And then in verse 35 we see, for whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel is the same shall save it. This is a very visual application for the people of the time of the writings of the Gospels, because if you spoke different to the rulers or the spiritual leaders of the day, your life was on the line. You could read many occasions through the New Testament of people being persecuted and tortured and even killed for believing in God. Jesus is saying that what is the point of you trying to gain everything now? Even if you got all of the world and then you lose your life in the pursuit, you would be pointless. Then you're dead and there's nothing to it. If we have saved our life now and tried to gain the world, then we are ashamed of God, and in the kingdom we'll be rejected. And as it says in verse 37, verse 38, if we are ashamed of Jesus and his words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he cometh into the kingdom. Another passage in 2 Timothy references, it's a faithful saying, if we are dead with him, we shall also live with him. And if we suffer, we shall also reign with him. And if we deny him, he will also deny us. So we see the words in the Mark record of this verse that we're looking at tonight, that they're a step-by-step logical process. We see that it's open to all, and it's on us to choose whether we want to follow Jesus. It's an internal choice to make. Denial of self is an internal fight that we have. And once that choice has been made, then how do we show this in our lives? Well, we take up our cross and we follow. Which leads us to the next section. In Luke 14 and verse 27, it says, "And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple." So we can first see here that if you are desirous to follow Jesus, then you need to take up your cross. We can see this quote in Luke that if we want to be a disciple of Christ, then we need to also bear up our cross. So there's a link between being a willing disciple and taking up our cross. Further to this, I'd like to just, if we turn over to Mark 10, we just want to look at another passage where this taking up your cross is mentioned. And we're just going to explore that story a little bit. So in Mark 10, and we start in verse 17. "And when he was gone forth into the way, there came one running, and kneeled to him, and asked him, Good master, what shall I do to inherit the eternal life?" So we see we're starting off a dialogue here of a young ruler, which the Luke record, the Matthew record states he's a young ruler, and he's coming to Jesus to asking him, what shall he do to inherit eternal life? So they continue their conversation, and we're going to come into this in verse 19. Jesus talks to him about knowing the commandments: don't commit adultery, do not kill, do not steal, do not bear false witness, defraud not, honour thy father and thy mother, which he replies that he has observed from his youth. And then in verse 21, this is the verse that we want to expand a little bit on. "Then Jesus, beholding him, loved him, and said unto him, One thing thou lackest. Go thy way, sell whatsoever thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven. And come, take up the cross, and follow me." Jesus could see that this man was a young ruler that had a lot going for him in the world around him. He'd climbed the tree and was a ruler. He's clearly wealthy and understood the law inside out and practiced it. But for this man, he had one weakness, and that was robbing his time, and sadly, it wasn't something that he was willing to give up. Christ challenged him. It's all well and good to say that I've done all the right things, as he says this from the luxury of his home, and he becomes comfortable with what he's got around him because he's made his own way in life and doesn't have a full trust in God. His possessions and riches were the problem. The following verses warn, in this Mark record, the following verses warn about this, that with riches, it's hard to enter into the kingdom of heaven. It's not the riches themselves that was necessarily the problem, but the problem was that the ruler valued the riches over following Christ. He wasn't prepared to give them up, but they became a stumbling block for him. And for us in our lives, we can have various stumbling blocks. So different stumbling blocks can be for different people at different times in their life. When a lifestyle or a habit gets in the way of what you could be doing for the truth as a disciple. So what takes up our time, and when we mention this, we see that in the Luke record of this young ruler, that Jesus actually states that to take up your cross daily. So it's not just daily is understandable that he says this, because if you've got a goal in mind, you can't just complete that goal in one day. It's a journey, it's a process. It's about making small, important daily decisions that impact on whether you'll get to that goal at the end. So we see that the invitation was open for all people who want to follow Jesus, but the choices we make have consequences. We see if we choose to follow Jesus, then we make the internal choice to deny self, deny sinful world, and then show that through our actions in our lives. But it's not a choice that we make once and then just go, good, it's all done and dusted, and return back to life. It's a daily choice, it's a daily commitment. What draws us away from God can and will be different at different times for different people. We need to understand this and be proactive in our daily lives to choose to deny our own desires and follow Christ's example. Probably should just find my other page here. It's a bit nervous there. So this the last section, which is section 4 on following him. It's a full cycle back to the start of the verse. The key difference at this last part of this verse, though, is that at the start it was a desire that we wanted to follow, and now it's an action that we have to do. So through the process, now we're actually doing what we set out to at the following Christ. So it's very important, because the young ruler, we can understand that he didn't fully follow through. He understood what he needed to do, but he couldn't fully commit to following. So the final section of this verse, to follow him, we are looking. It's one thing to understand what is expected of us, and it's one thing to point out the problems in our lives, but that's not what we're asked of us. We're asked that we need not only to recognise the areas we need to change in our lives daily, but we have to be willing to follow Jesus. For the young ruler, this was his downfall. He understood the law, he had followed the commandments to a T, but he was keen to know what more he could do. But when he found out the last hurdle, he walked away. He was so close, but just one thing in his life was too big to let go. The record states that he actually, when he heard the words of Jesus, he was sad and gloomy. He went away distressed because he had much possessions. He understood the process of following, but he was not willing, but just one big thing in his life that he wasn't prepared to give up. And for this, he couldn't fulfill the very last part of the process, be willing to let go of all and follow. So what does it mean to take up your cross? It means the same. What does it mean today? It means the same today as it did when it was first said. It's about wanting to change and to follow Jesus. It's about being able to daily put aside the things of the world and not having anything that puts a barrier between us and Christ. It's part of a process to not be taken out by itself. It fits into a whole process of the speech. First, we must want to follow Christ. Then we have to ignore our own desires, understand that what's stopping us from fully committing to following him and being able to leave that behind. And after understanding the theory of this, being willing to act by taking up our cross and following Jesus daily.